what you're trying to do here.
Good morning.
Okay.
I'm David Barish, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. Before we begin, I again ask people to silence their cell phones. With us today is Fred Strathmeyer, representing the Secretary of Agriculture, Jennifer Langen, representing the State Treasurer, and Bob Coyne, representing the Secretary of Revenue. Quorum of the board being present, I'll call the meeting to order. First order of business, I'd like everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I hope it's not different.
By way of announcements, the board held an executive session yesterday on March 1st for the purpose of discussing personnel matters and to conduct quasi-judicial deliberations relating to matters before the board today. Next, we'll hear from our counsel, Doug Sherman.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Today, the board has just one petition before it for consideration. That petition is that of Shannon Dark, and it's a request to lift the suspension of her gaming employee occupation permit. The matter is to be decided on the documents filed of record as it is uncontested, and OEC has not objected to the lifting of the suspension. Briefly, in February of 2015, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint to suspend Ms. Dark's occupation permit after learning that she had been arrested and charged with numerous offenses stemming from an incident where Ms. Dark had forcibly entered a neighbor's home, assaulted a woman, and thereafter threatened her own roommate. Prior to that incident, Ms. Dark was employed as a table game dealer at the Parks Casino. As a result of the incident, in March of 2015, Ms. Dark was found guilty of simple assault, possession of an instrument of crime, and terroristic threats. She was sentenced to 4 years of probation and ordered, among other conditions, to participate in an intensive drug and alcohol treatment program. As a result of the conviction, on September 23rd, the board suspended the gaming permit until at least the completion of her drug and alcohol treatment program. Ms. Dark is now requesting that suspension be lifted as she has completed her court-ordered treatment. The Office of Enforcement Counsel, as I stated, has no objection to the request, and it is verified that, in fact, she successfully completed the treatment program. The matter is now ready for the board's consideration.
Any questions or comments from the board or executive ex officio members? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the petition of Shannon Dark to lift the suspension of her gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, presenting withdrawals and reports and recommendations is Deputy Chief Counsel Steve Cook.
Morning. The board has received several unopposed petitions to withdraw the applications or surrender the credentials of individuals or businesses. The persons and entities subject to these petitions, and I'll provide this list to the court reporter at the end of the meeting. But the persons and entities subject to these petitions are as follows: Victor Duarte, Forsyth Solutions Group, Inc., Catherine Lever, and Scott Staby. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has no objection to any of these withdrawals or surrenders, and as a result, if the board chooses to grant the request, it would be doing so without prejudice. Before the board votes on these matters, however, I would note for the record that with respect to Scott Staby, while Bally Gaming filed a petition to surrender Mr. Staby's key employee license, and he's no longer employed by Bally, the Office of Enforcement Counsel has determined that Mr. Staby has now accepted a position with Aristocrat Technologies that would require his key employee licensure. Rather than having Mr. Staby surrender his key employee license to only turn around and submit another application, all the parties, including Bally, have agreed to let him keep his license and simply have it carry over to Aristocrat. As a result, the Office of Chief Counsel would recommend the petition of Bally relative to Scott Staby, be dismissed.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue orders to approve the withdrawals and surrenders without prejudice, except with respect to Bally Gaming's request to surrender the key employee license of Scott Stavey, which should be dismissed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next before the board for consideration are two reports and recommendations received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals. These reports and recommendations, along with the complete evidentiary record, have been provided to the board in advance of this meeting. Additionally, in each case, the persons subject to these reports and recommendations have been notified that the board would be taking the matter up today, and that they could come forward and briefly address the board. If either of these persons are present, I would ask them to come forward when their matter is called, if they are choosing to briefly address the board. The first report and recommendation pertains to Sean McNulty, who I believe is present today. On August 24th, 2015, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint to place Mr. McNulty on the exclusion list. A hearing in this matter was held on October 6, 2015. The Office of Enforcement Counsel appeared at the hearing, offering testimony and other evidence, and Mr. McNulty also participated in the hearing pro se, cross-examining OEC's witnesses and providing his own testimony. According to OEC's witnesses, on March 9, 2015, Mr. McNulty called Parks Casino to request a copy of his win-loss statement for the 2014 calendar year, excuse me, so that he could complete his taxes. Mr. McNulty spoke to a player services manager who informed him that the address the casino had on record for him was not the same one he was requesting the statement to be sent to, and as a result, she could not immediately put the statement in the mail, but would have to confirm his new address. According to this woman's testimony, upon receiving this information, Mr. McNulty became angry, verbally abusive, and threatened to shoot her. Subsequently, the player service manager reported the incident to casino security, and later the matter was referred to the board's casino compliance representatives and the Pennsylvania State Police. Thereafter, Mr. McNulty was charged criminally, pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct, and was sentenced to not have contact with the victim or enter the Parks Casino. In its petition and at the hearing, OEC also put into evidence that Mr. McNulty had previously been ejected from Parks, Valley Forge, and Sugar House casinos for various incidents, including panhandling and initiating an argument with casino staff. During the hearing, Mr. McNulty testified that the player services managers at Parks had misheard him and that he had a speech impediment due to his having previously suffered a stroke. Mr. McNulty testified that he told the woman that he was going to sue her, not shoot her. Regarding his prior evictions from Parks and two other Pennsylvania casinos, Mr. McNulty did not dispute the allegations, but did indicate that at least one, if not all three, of these casinos have since lifted their evictions. This matter is now ready for the board's consideration. As indicated, Mr. McNulty is present, and he's been told he could briefly address the board up to about a 5-minute period.
Mr. McNulty, would you please stand and be sworn as a witness?
Yes.
Thank you. Please summarize your...
In short, the main incident why they're trying to kick me out of the casinos is because they believe that I threatened to shoot someone. In fact, in February, about a month before, I had a stroke. Also, I would like to argue that she gave inconsistent testimony in a couple different things. I'm going to read from the little excerpts of where she gave inconsistent testimony. She actually changed her testimony at the hearing that he's talking about. First quote was from, I was asking her, when you asked Dustin Miller, when you said you talked to Dustin Miller, you said, I hung up the phone aggressively, correct? She said, correct. How can you hang up a phone aggressively? She said, you could hear the phone line, that the phone was slammed. Now we're going to go to page 36. I'm sorry, hold on one second. to page 35 of the testimony, I said, hold on, so what you're saying is that it could have been, despite the fact you just said you heard me hang up the phone, now you're saying it just hung up, it ended abruptly. So what you're saying is the call could have been lost and you can't actually hear the difference on the cell phone, correct? Correct. But the timing of the end of the conversation, it seemed like the phone conversation was ended abruptly. She repeatedly, throughout the entire transcript of when she talked, gave inconsistent testimony. She stated on, I believe it's page 23, I'm sorry. Go over this real quick. She also admitted on page 21. So I said, so if at the hearing you had slight variations on what you said, I said. And and what she said at the preliminary hearing, you quoted me differently as to what it was actually said. Repeatedly, she changed her testimony. It's little bits and pieces of her testimony. She admits in the transcript that she has misquoted people. I tried to ask her how often she misquoted people or misheard people and what they said. The hearing examiner had gotten in the conversation and basically said that everyone has, just like she did, but they wouldn't quantify how often it happened. If she admits that she's misheard people, and everyone's had songs or something that they've heard that they're singing the words to, and their friends correct them and say that's not the wording for the song. Very simply, you might have heard the song 40 times, but it's the key lyrics, so you've heard that same thing 400 times, you heard it wrong. It's possible over a phone line, which is notorious for many times having bad communications. It's possible, and you can hear that I do slur my words a little bit. Not a lot, a little bit. I'm getting a lot better than where I was. But the fact of the matter is it possible that someone could have misheard someone or misquoted someone? And I'm not saying that she intentionally is trying to cause me trouble, but the fact of the matter is, it's her word against mine. It's hearsay. Pennsylvania has a law stating that they have the burden of proving that it was said, and you can't prove it was said. You can say you believe that she believes it's being said, but you can't prove that it was said. The casino, when you call the casino, it states the phone calls are recorded, not may be recorded, but are recorded. There is no recording of the phone call. I have no way to prove that I did or didn't say it. But it would be kind of stupid to sit there and say, I'm going to sue you in 2 days. If you're going to threaten to shoot someone, wouldn't you threaten to shoot them then and not in 2 days? I mean, it's little things that I didn't understand how it got traveled so far. In the court system, if someone makes a criminal complaint against someone, the police have to follow up and they have to press the charges if someone says, I want to press charges. She said she wanted to press charges. The police had to go through with it. They didn't have a choice of saying, is it believable or not believable? The police...
Mr. Nolte, would you summarize now?
Okay, I'm sorry. In short, I didn't say what I was accused of saying. My other big problem I had was with Valley Forge Casino. I had a bet that was a $500 bet. They said I gave a hand signal. When the Casino Control Commission reviewed the tape, which is the same day that they kicked me out, they said that I didn't give a hand signal, and they advised the casino to give me the money. When the Casino Control Commission made that recommendation, they said no. They came back to me. They said, look, we have no power. We can't make them give the money to you. It's up to them. You can sue them. It'll take you 2 years. Eventually, I ended up telling everyone I could at the casino that they cheated me, that they were cheating me. The Casino Control Commission verified that what I said was true. So then they said, okay, we'll give you your $500.
But that's not this matter.
Right. But
Don't do that.
It's one of the,
Just finish up what you have to say on this matter,
Well, there's,
okay? We've been at this now for about 8 minutes.
they said that it was three, they said there were three matters why I was trying to get, why they were trying to.
Just finish, please.
That's the main one. I didn't say what I was accused of saying,
Okay.
and there is no proof of it.
Okay, thank you.
I can't prove or disprove
Okay,
it.
thank you very much.
I would appreciate it if you could allow me to continue going to the casinos. I enjoy them.
I appreciate you for coming in and stating your views to us. Thank you very much. You can go have a seat.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? Anybody?
I have one question. Steve, and it's to you. You had mentioned that there were other casinos involved that he was evicted from.
Yes,
Valley Forge, I take it, was one.
correct.
Parks, of course, because of the win-loss and the comment made. And the third,
Sugar House, I believe.
and panhandling.
One incident, and I don't know which matches up with which casino, but one was panhandling, one was credit punching, which is essentially walking around looking for people that left credits behind on machines, and playing those credits. And the third was the Valley Forge incident.
Was he charged for the credit?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So obviously, to me, there's a pattern here. You know,
There's a pattern of disruptive behavior over the course of time, yeah.
and the evictions from those other casinos. Did you say they were lifted?
At least Sugar House was lifted. I'm not sure if all three were lifted or not.
Parks is not at this point.
Parks, he's excluded from Parks, and actually is court-ordered excluded from Parks also as a result of the criminal charges that came from this incident.
Thank you very much.
If I can briefly, Mr. Cook, the hearing officer in this matter found the witness from the casino to be credible at that hearing. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah, the report and recommendation basically acknowledges that this is a he said, she said incident, but found the Parks employee's testimony much more credible than Mr. McNulty's.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Sean McNulty's placement on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The second and final report and recommendation before the board today pertains to Matthew McVeigh. On October 9th, 2015, Mr. McVeigh submitted a gaming employee permit application seeking work as a table games dealer at the Harris Casino. Mr. McVeigh disclosed his criminal history on his application. However, based upon the nature and recency of his criminal record, the Office of Enforcement Counsel issued a notice of recommendation of denial. Specifically, Mr. McVeigh had 4 DUI arrests between 1999 and 2014, 3 of which resulted in convictions and 1 ARD. Additionally, in 2012, Mr. McVeigh was convicted of simple assault, terroristic threats, and possession of drug paraphernalia after an altercation with a neighbor. The hearing in this matter was held on December 22, 2015. Mr. McVeigh and the Office of Enforcement Counsel both appeared at the hearing, offering testimony and documentary evidence. Mr. McVeigh testified that he has stopped using alcohol, attends NA and AA meetings every week, and speaks to his sponsor daily. He further testified that he is compliant with the conditions of his probation and has been clean and sober since, at this point in time, 6 months ago, or August 2015. He finally testified that he's currently employed full-time as the manager of an Italian restaurant, but seeks to work as a dealer as a second source of income. Thereafter, a report and recommendation was issued in which the hearing officer recommends that notwithstanding Mr. McVeigh's long history of criminal cases involving alcohol and substance abuse, that he be granted a gaming permit given his efforts at recovery, and that is the recommendation before the board today.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Matthew McVeigh's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And that concludes all matters of the
Thank you.
Office of Chief Counsel.
Sue Hensel, Bureau of Licensing.
Thank you, Chairman Barish and members of the board. Before the board today will be motions regarding 631 principal, key, gaming, and non-gaming employees. In addition, there will be the consideration of 16 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the approval of principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 2 principal and 1 key employee licenses. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Comments from Enforcement Council.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of principal and key employee licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also, there are temporary key employee licenses for your consideration. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 7 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving the licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of temporary key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, there are gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 331 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits, and 210 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of gaming employee permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, there are recommendations of denial for 3 gaming employee applicants. In each case, the applicant failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing the applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the denials.
Comments from Enforcement Council?
Enforcement Council continues to request denial in each instance.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny the gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration are withdrawal requests for gaming and non-gaming employees. In each case, the license or permit is no longer required. For today's meeting, I've provided the board with a list of 59 gaming and 18 non-gaming employee withdrawals for approval. I ask that the board consider the orders approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Council?
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the withdrawals as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
In addition, we have an order to certify the following gaming service provider applicants: Coristan, Inc., Ebenestery Boubois, LTE, Illuminating Concepts, Ltd., doing business as Illuminating Concepts. I ask that the board consider the order approving these gaming service providers for certification.
Comments from Enforcement Council?
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the applications for gaming service provider certification as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Finally, for your consideration are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 13 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering these gaming service providers.
Enforcement Council?
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
That concludes the matters of the Bureau of Licensing.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 17 matters for the board's consideration today, consisting of 1 consent agreement, 6 revocations, and 10 involuntary exclusions. The first matter, OEC matter on the agenda is a consent agreement that has been negotiated between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Presque Isle Downs, Inc. The matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel Kim Adams.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good morning. Kim Adams, Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next consent agreement for your consideration is between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Presque Isle Downs and Casino, whereby Presque Isle acknowledges that it improperly stored and secured PGCB-approved roulette equipment and other associated equipment by leaving the equipment in a room being used for roulette dealer training that did not have a proper locking mechanism. On October 13, 2015, the Bureau of Casino Compliance discovered a roulette gaming table with corresponding layout and associated equipment in an unsecured room on the gaming floor. Casino Compliance had given Presque Isle permission to temporarily use this room for training on June 17th through June 18th of 2015, August 2nd, 2015, August 13th, 2015, August 16th, 2015, and August 17th of 2015. However, it was discovered the room that was being utilized as a dealer training room was not properly secured and the equipment was not removed from the room once training was completed. Specifically, the door did not have a locking mechanism and the corresponding electronic swipe was not activated. Additionally, from September 30th, 2015 through October 13th, 2015, 6 separate Presque Isle employees were discovered having opened the door and/or entered the room without having to use a key. The parties have entered into this agreement that within 10 days of the date of the board order adopting this agreement, Presque Isle shall pay a civil penalty in the amount of $10,000. The parties have also agreed that within 10 days of the date of the board order, Presque Isle shall pay $2,500 for the costs incurred by the Office of Enforcement Counsel and other staff in connection with this matter. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is recommending that the board approve this consent agreement. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Who's here on behalf of Presque Isle? If you could identify yourselves.
Certainly. Tom Deal, D-I-E-H-L, in-house counsel for Presque Isle Downs. And to my right, Kevin O'Sullivan, who's our assistant GM. Although we're not do not intend to make an independent presentation, should any technical questions arise that I certainly would not be able to address, Mr. O'Sullivan's here for that purpose.
Just to cover, in case there are questions, if you, sir, would stand and be sworn.
Absolutely. I do.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board? No? Okay.
Just one question for me, and Cyrus or Kim, I don't know if you can answer this. Just the significance of why it's so important to keep that. I mean, I'm not going to. Who's going to go in that room and gamble or play with that roulette wheel? I just don't. I just need to understand the significance of why it's so critical that it be locked up.
Because a patient can walk in and remove. There were non-value chips in there that were being used for training. Those items could be removed. The roulette ball could be removed. Aside from that, it creates an avenue where casino table games or equipment is improperly stored and where the general public can access those rooms. It's just to keep it secure and to ensure that there's no nefarious activity that's occurring by removing different things or counterfeiting those things after they've been removed from that space.
Okay. That's good. Thank you, Cyrus.
May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Presque Isle Downs, Inc., as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
The next 6 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed a complaint seeking the revocation of registrations and permits that have been issued by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the complaint. The individual named in the complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served a default judgment upon each individual. Thereby, the facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, we'll read a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn Stewart for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. It's S-T-U-A-R-T. Next for the board's consideration is the revocation of Carrie Dotson's non-gaming registration. On January 3rd, 2015, Ms. Dotson used false identification to attempt to obtain a casino access pass at the Valley Forge Casino Resort in furtherance of her attempt to gain access to Valley Forge's gaming floor. At the time, Ms. Dotson was employed in the valet department at Harris, Philadelphia. As such, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the board revoke the non-gaming registration of Carrie Dotson.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of Carrie Dotson's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. David Tepper, T-E-P-P-E-R, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I have for your consideration today a complaint to revoke the non-gaming employee registration of Shelia Murr. Ms. Murr drove under the influence of alcohol with 3 children and a hitchhiker in her vehicle, during which time she was involved in a serious accident. She has been criminally charged and convicted regarding this offense, and at this point, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that her non-gaming employee registration be revoked.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of Sheila Mears' non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. John Crow for the Office of Enforcement Counsel, C-R-O-H-E. The next matter before the board is a request to consider the revocation of Sally Green's gaming permit issued in connection with her position at Hollywood Casino, her former position. Ms. Green was arrested and found to be in possession of marijuana plants and subsequently pleaded guilty to possession with intent to manufacture, as well as other drug-related charges. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board revoke the gaming permit held by Sally Green.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of Sally Green's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for the board's consideration is the revocation of Anthony Habbard's gaming employee permit. While employed as a security officer at Mohegan Downs Pocono, Mr. Habbard, while underage and still in his work uniform, gamed at slots and consumed alcohol. The Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Habbard's gaming employee permit be revoked at this time.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of Anthony Habbard's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for the board's consideration is the revocation of Shane Krause's non-gaming employee registration. Mr. Krause was denied a G2 employee permit for failing to be compliant with the Department of Revenue. At this time, Mr. Krause is still not compliant with the Department of Revenue, and the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Krause's non-gaming employee permit be revoked.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of Shane Krause's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for the board's consideration is the revocation of Arvind Bhai Patel's non-gaming employee registration for failing to properly turn over a $500 chip that was dropped by a patron. This time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Patel's non-gaming employee registration be revoked.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of Arvindabhai Patel's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The remaining 10 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth and are licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in the petition failed to file a response within 30 days as required by board regulations, and as a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each individual. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for board consideration. Once again, we'll read a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
The next matter for the board's consideration is the placement of Anthony Havard on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Havard gamed and consumed alcohol at Mohegan Sun Pocono when he was underage, employed by Mohegan Sun and still in his uniform, same individual who we just asked to have his gaming employee permit revoked. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Havard be placed on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Anthony Havard to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning again, John Crow for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter before the board is a request to consider the placement of Arjun Dulal on the board's involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Dulal had his non-gaming registration revoked after capping bets while gaming at Meadows Casino and subsequently pleading guilty to summary disorderly conduct. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board add Mr. Dulal to the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Arjun Dulal to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter before the board is a request to consider the placement of Craig Smith on the board's involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Smith capped the bets of another player while gaming at Meadows Casino, gave a false name to Pennsylvania State Police, and subsequently pleaded guilty to providing false identification to law enforcement. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board add Mr. Smith to the board's excluded persons list.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Craig Smith to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter before the board is a request to consider the placement of Ashley Zhang on the board's involuntary exclusion list. Ms. Zhang gamed at Hollywood Casino for approximately 1 hour and 13 minutes while two minors, ages 13 and 1, were left attendant in her vehicle in the casino parking lot. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board add Ms. Zhang to the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board?
One question, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crow, what time of the day was this event?
This occurred at approximately 9 o'clock at night.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Ashley Zhang to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board, Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next two matters are related and arise out of the same fact pattern. With the permission of the board, I'd like to read one set of facts for both and then request placement on the exclusion list for each individual.
Fine.
Thank you. On October 1st, 2015, Joseph Falacaro and John Martinelli were criminally charged by Pennsylvania State Police after investigation at Parks Casino. The Pennsylvania State Police investigation revealed that Mr. Falacaro, a patron of Parks Casino, had loaned Mr. Martinelli an unknown amount of money in order to fund Mr. Martinelli's illegal sports gambling. In exchange, Mr. Martinelli, as the director of player services at Parks Casino, arranged for Mr. Falacaro to have access to free slot machine credit at Parks Casino in order to repay his personal debt. It is also alleged that Mr. Martinelli rigged a promotional contest at Parks Casino, resulting in Mr. Falacaro winning the grand prize. This conduct occurred between September 2012 and September of 2013. Mr. Martinelli was forced to resign his employment at Parks Casino on September 19, 2013, after discovery of his actions.
Both Mr. Falacaro and Mr. Martinelli have been charged with multiple theft-related offenses. Those charges remain pending at this time. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Falacaro on the exclusion list on October 23, 2015. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asks that the Board place Joseph Falacaro on the Board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the addition of Joseph Falacaro to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Likewise, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Martinelli on the exclusion list on October 23, 2015. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asks that the Board place John Martinelli on the Board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the addition of John Martinelli to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter today is a request for placement on the Board's excluded persons list involving Peter Maker. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Maker on the exclusion list on December 1, 2015 for being criminally charged for operating a business involving illegal gambling devices, specifically video poker machines, in bars and taverns in the city of Philadelphia. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asks that the Board place Peter Maker on the Board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the addition of Peter Maker to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. My name is Cassandra Fenstermaker, Fenstermaker. We have for your consideration a petition to exclude Joseph Bestman as a result of his actions while patronizing Harrah's Philadelphia Casino and Racetrack on 2 separate occasions, one incident involving a physical altercation with another patron and the other involved bet capping. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that Joseph Bestman be added to the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the addition of Joseph Bestman to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Michael Rowland, ROL, A&D, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next, we have a request to place Christopher Jenkins on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Jenkins was observed capping his bets while playing blackjack at Sands Casino. He was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with knowingly by trick or fraud to win or reduce loss, that's under our Gaming Act, and with theft by deception and false identification to law enforcement officers. The charges are all still pending, and the matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Christopher Jenkins on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Christopher Jenkins to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration is a petition to place Bernard Malatesta on the board's exclusion list. Mr. Malatesta has stolen vouchers on at least 4 occasions from 3 separate casinos in Pennsylvania, and at this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that Bernard Malatesta be placed on the board's exclusion
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Bernard Malatesta to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Thank you. That concludes our business.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's meeting. Our next scheduled meeting will be held on Wednesday, March 30th. The meeting will begin at 10 a.m. in this room. Are there any other final comments from the board? May I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Right there.